Hello there. This is Rom Wills coming back at you again with yet another video. Today, I'm going to talk about understanding Mr. Goodbar. Now, the master teacher, Black Gnostic Speaks, he did a response video to my video, The Real Deal with Alpha Males. And it was a good response. It was more, off the cuff, more personal. Because he talked about his son, the alpha male, and he really got deep into it. Now he went deeper than I usually get, at least publicly. But here's the thing: if I had to say I had an area of specialty with talking about relationships and talking about who's getting what and all of that, it would be with those sexual alpha males, because I understand the mindset the best. Because over the years, the sexual ones, not the not the kick-ass business guys or the smart guys, but the guys who are getting it based on pure physical presentation. I understand them the best because I've talked to them over the years. Many have shared their secrets with me and their perspective. And trust me, it's a different perspective. And like I said, and to be honest, even though I said, a lot of them may not be, all that intelligent, there's still some who are closer to that Uber category. You got some cats out there who, they got the physical Goodbar thing going on, but, they're very smart academically, or they are very, business savvy, and they just sharp. The master teacher, Black Gnostic Speaks, used the example Fidel Castro. That uber alpha male. Got something going on upstairs, but also like a physical prodigy. So that's always been my specialty. But see, at the same time, though, a lot of men can't relate to that. And it's understandable, because you halfway have to be born into that. I hate to put it that way. Now, it's not to say other men can't get sex. They just got to do it differently from what a Goodbar would do. That's all it is. And it's not to say everything is perfect with these Goodbars. Far from it, which is why a lot of them have come to me over the years for coaching and stuff. Because a lot of times you get a different type of drama as a Goodbar than you do as just ordinary cat out here. But you still get drama nevertheless. Goodbars, they get cheated on, they get divorced, and they got women trying to kill them. In fact, I would say they get an intensified form of drama, but drama nonetheless. Now, I'm gonna read an excerpt, because I like reading excerpts. And it's from my second book, the follow-up to Nice Guys and Players, Sexual Chemistry, Nice Guys and Players Level 2. And if you can blow up that picture on the book cover I have on the thumbnail, that's me about 1994. So, young guy out there doing his thing, illicit or not illicit. So one of the things I wanted to read, the excerpt I wanted to read from this was from my chapter in sexual chemistry. It was called Understanding Mr. Goodbar. Now, sexual chemistry, everybody who's read both books, they say this is real deep. And I purposely got deeper in sexual chemistry. I went more like Nice Guys and Players. That's more general. Anybody could basically read that. Anybody from 8 to 80 can read it. Sexual chemistry gonna make you think, though, because I get deep. I talk about the components of sexual chemistry, how to generate it, and all of that stuff. And basically, I reverse engineer the Goodbar. So anybody could really, to be honest, anybody, though I said, guys pretty much born into it, it is possible to change yourself physically. It's hard, but it's possible. Anyway, let me read on my chapter in sexual chemistry called Understanding Mr. Goodbar. I start off with a little jive poem. But I ain't gonna read all that because I got a lot in there. And I talk about just the whole phenomenon, how other guys respond to Mr. Goodbar. But then I come to a part in there where I have a Mr. Goodbar scenario. And this book was published in 2002. So at the time, what I did was put a composite of the stories that I was told by these sexual alpha males, these Goodbars. And I put it into a scenario, the most common scenario. And it's interesting. Well, one thing, it had a certain cultural context to it because it was primarily African American Goodbars. But in the subsequent years, I've encountered a lot of Caucasian Goodbars. But I was pretty much coming across the same issues. Maybe just slightly different. Like, even one guy, he was a Jewish Goodbar. I think, that dude was a trip. And, but for this, it was primarily African American Goodbars. And it was common scenarios. And I'm going to read it, but I might leave one part out. You have to read the book. It's not a big part, but certain contexts have changed just a little bit since I first wrote it. But the following scenario is what I found most in common with these sexual alpha males. And just to be clear, I use the term alpha as more a reference. I'm not big into that thing, alpha and beta. My thing is every single man is a potential alpha. Every single man is a potential beta. Any man who takes on a family is in a leadership position with a family is an alpha male. That's the bottom line. I don't care what you look like, what your body look like, or anything. But like I said, I'll use it in this context as a reference. Even though at the time I wrote this, I ain't used the word alpha male at all. This was, when I first wrote this was before the term was just used in a strict like the pickup artist subculture. Because back then it wasn't mainstream. This was before people heard of that book The Game by Neil Strauss, so people didn't know, people weren't as familiar with it. I mean, and I should do a video on that because I knew some guys who were a part of that like original crew back when it was a deep subculture, and trust me, they were getting deep. Those Bammers were getting into stuff like hypnosis and everything. I think I will do a video on that at some point because I was familiar with some people in it, and it wasn't no young guys either. You had some dudes in their 40s and 50s getting into it. But anyway, let me get started with this scenario. Hold on. All right, so here it is, Mr. Goodbar scenario. Now, the start of this scenario is a young man named Tony. All right, here we go. Tony is an African American male born into a low-income household to a single mother. He is the youngest of 3 children, the other 2 being sisters. His mother, Olivia, works on minimum wage jobs when she can find work. Olivia and her family, however, are able to live relatively well because the men Olivia dates are fairly generous with their finances. Olivia and her daughters as well are very attractive physically. They use this to their advantage. Olivia will have several men who will take her to dinner, buy her expensive gifts, and pay her bills, including her rent. Sometimes she sleeps with the men. More often she implies she may sleep with them if they provide her with gifts. Her daughters, as they grow into teenagers, take after their mother. They will only date boys with an access to cars or money. Both are sexually active. Both the mother and daughters will walk around the small house they rent wearing sexually provocative clothes. Olivia doesn't belong to an organized religion and is only formally educated as far as the high school level. As his mother and sisters are attractive to men, Tony is equally attractive to women. Tony is equally as intelligent. He stays to himself a lot and reads whatever he can get his hands on. Tony, however, is a very average student in school. Tony attends a public school where the teachers are overworked and underpaid, and other than a handsome face, Tony doesn't stand out in their minds. The reality is that Tony is not being challenged academically. Once Tony hits puberty, he begins to get bigger and more muscular. When he gets to high school, Tony starts playing football and subsequently becomes more noticed by the female students, and in particular one teacher. One of Tony's female teachers began to take an interest in Tony beyond schoolwork. Despite being married, the teacher starts flirting with Tony in a subtle manner. Unknown to the teacher, Tony picks up on this. After all, his mother and sisters were pros at flirting and manipulating men. In other words, Tony had seen this type of behavior. Tony pretended to be oblivious to the teacher's overtures for a few months. The more Tony ignored the teacher, the more she flirted. Finally, on a pretext of helping Tony with a project, the teacher invited him to her home while her husband was away on business. Once in the home, Tony allowed the woman to think she had seduced him. The reality was that Tony was in control of the situation the whole time. Tony and the teacher continued the affair for a few months. Now, other female students and teachers picked up on the vibe that something was going on. Tony used this pretext to break off the relationship. The teacher didn't take it well and ended up taking a leave of absence. In the meantime, rumors about Tony and the teacher intrigued many of the female students to the point that there was much competition for him. Tony became one of the most popular boys in school. Unlike other boys, Tony was able to be cool with the attention from beautiful girls. The girls actually liked him more because the other boys in school always acted stupid around the more beautiful girls. It was no big deal to Tony because his mother and sisters were very attractive. Another thing that girls liked about Tony was that he was his own man. He never followed the crowd. By the time Tony graduated high school, he had slept with quite a few girls. He was accepted into a local college and managed to stay there for only 2 years. The college environment didn't really appeal to him. At this point, although Tony was very intelligent, he didn't know what to do with his life. He also didn't want to move back to his mother's house. Through the help of a couple of friends, Tony was able to get a job at a sportswear store and also at a gym. He was also able to get a small apartment and a used car. Tony's sex appeal was both beneficial and a hindrance to him on his jobs. At the store and the gym, he got a lot of attention from female customers. Often women would seek him out at these places. Some he would sleep with, some he would reject. The hindrance came from co-workers. At the store, other men would be jealous of the attention Tony got from women and thus would not cooperate with him on many occasions. At the gym, Tony rejected the advances of a female manager, which kept him from getting raises even though he was a hard worker. Tony would eventually leave these jobs and get other jobs, but the pattern would always be the same. Tony would draw a lot of attention from women, someone would get jealous or scorn, and they would cause trouble for Tony. Tony would then be forced to look for another job. After a few years of this, Tony came to a crossroads. He decided to go into business for himself. Tony had a large amount of money in his savings account. He was able to save so much money because the women he slept with didn't require him to spend too much money on them. Often the women would pay for dates, especially the older women he dated. Tony was also a talented artist. Tony had experience selling sportswear and working in gyms, so he decided to create a line of t-shirts with sports themes on them. He then got a vending license to sell shirts on city streets. After taking care of legalities, Tony was in business. After starting off slow, Tony was able to eventually expand his business by designing other athletic wear, and he was able to move into a store in a busy shopping mall. Tony would later be able to expand to other stores, and he started carrying products by other designers. Wait a minute, hold on a second. Okay, had to check something real quick. Started carrying products by other designers. On the business side, Tony's star was rising. Tony's personal life was another thing. Tony continued to attract women as always. Tony's appeal was primarily sexual. Tony had money, the status of a successful business owner, and plenty of beautiful women throwing themselves at him. Despite this, Tony was feeling that something was missing. Tony wasn't a religious man because it wasn't in his upbringing. He did feel there was a higher power because he always observed a certain order in nature. Tony at this point began to seek out a spiritual path. He attended a few churches and mosques but didn't feel quite right with them. Tony kept searching for months until he happened upon a small African-centered bookstore. As he browsed books in the spirituality section, the store's owner, Jared, approached him. As he talked, Tony surprised himself by sharing details about his life with Jared. He talked about his family and his relationships with women and how he generally perceived the world. Jared listened patiently and then suggested a few books to Tony. The books dealt with African spiritual systems, holistic sexuality, and organic health. Tony read the books over the next week, and though many of the concepts were new to him, he was able to quickly grasp some basics. He visited the store again and talked with Jared, and the two had a very long conversation. Jared was a storehouse of knowledge. By talking with Jared and reading the books, Tony was able to understand many issues in his life, particularly his seeming inability to settle with one woman. Tony subconsciously didn't want to settle with women because of issues he had with his mother's lifestyle. He wanted her to behave more like what he considered a normal mother. He saw his mother's traits in women he dated, even in situations where this really wasn't the case. Through self-examination, he discovered that deep down, he didn't trust women enough to settle down with them. Subconsciously, he felt the woman would turn out like his mother. By facing this issue, Tony was able to begin making conscious changes in his lifestyle. Now, yeah, and that's basically finished out the scenario by saying, eventually met a nice young lady, yada yada, lived happily ever after. And it was several when I did this. There were several underlying themes with this scenario that I got at the time from dealing with some Goodbars, and that hasn't really changed over the years. Even though, I could add like more white and even a couple of Hispanic Goodbars to the mix. Now, the first thing had to do with his socioeconomic background. Many of these Goodbar types come from poor environments. Especially single mother environments. Let me say that again. Come from poor environments, especially single mother environments. I mean, I've met a few that might have had a father in the picture, and that does happen. And those are usually the ones with the fathers are usually the more well-adjusted. But you'd be surprised how many of these dudes out here running a bunch of women, you start looking, there wasn't a steady father in the background. And they usually, especially if they were good looking, they usually grew up around some women who kind of, catered to them. I actually saw that one time. I was in a store years ago, and it was this 14-year-old kid, had his shades on, had these grown women like basically doing what he was saying. And I said, yeah, this dude gonna be a future pimp. Anyway, one of the issues I talked about too was that the sexual nature of his mother and sister. And I can guarantee this every time. You take any child, male or female, they grow up in a sexualized environment, they're going to have a distinct sexual aura to them. In other words, they're not going to do anything to hold themselves back. And sometimes they might even be overtly sexual. It's easy to see with women because they are dressed like hoochies and thoughts. The men might be a little bit flirty and might have a tendency, if they on a regular job, to have some issues with somebody trying to claim sexual harassment or something, even if they just say hi. Because a woman always is going to feel that sexual tension with them. Now, something else too, and maybe this just had to do with who I met personally and talked with, and maybe just who I keep in my circles, but that was the intelligence. Sometimes you do have, even though I've encountered a lot of these cats who, are basically goons, you do have some of these dudes who are closer to the Uber model. And I don't mean like super Uber, but they got some intelligence. They ain't just brickheads, So, but it might not be seen that way because, a lot of times in the society, if somebody is too physically attractive or something, there's a tendency to like look down on them. So, other parts of the scenario was this experience with a teacher. And this has come from personal interviews. I've never seen this to fail. We always hear about what men are doing with young girls. Older men and young girls. In fact, I even talked about it on a blog talk show. There's a lot of these older women, teachers, women in the neighborhood, sleeping with some young boy. I mean, I pay very close attention if any older woman is friendly with one of my sons. Seriously, I pay close fucking attention. Because you have a lot of these women, they will take advantage. In fact, I know of one case, and I haven't kept up with it as much, where a woman took advantage, a couple cases where women teachers took advantage of autistic kids. Like, cause you have some autistic boys out there who are pretty handsome, and you get like some teacher, some inclusion helper or something, try to have sex with them. You know, so that's a big factor, and you'd be surprised how many guys will say, "Oh yeah, this neighbor sucked my dick when I was 16," or "This woman flirted." Shoot, I got some experiences I ain't gonna talk about. So it's like, they talk about what these men be doing out here, but look, I'm gonna tell you from personal experience. Older women are a trip. They get some young boy. Don't think just cause that she like 40 or something. If she in decent shape, don't think she won't fuck that young boy if she get a chance. Ask me how I know. So anyway, let me go on. Another thing was Tony was able to be cool around girls around his own age. That's shit. He growing up. If a dude grow up around some very beautiful women, especially if they're his cousins, or sisters or something like that. In my case, it was cousins, but if they like his sisters or something like that, where you have to, at least if you don't live in like some poor place where they just don't care, but you're going to tend to develop like an immunity towards beauty, and you're going to learn to be cool. Also, too, just a hustler thing, and this is among the more positive Goodbar types. Like a lot of them just working wherever, but you do get a few who they just straight up hustlers. And then the religion piece. It's like what I found interesting. A whole lot of these cats aren't, they quick to like go outside the quote unquote, Judeo-Christian norm. I mean, like, I've met quite a few good bars who were black Muslims. In fact, I personally think the Nation of Islam, I think they recruit for good bars myself, just to be straight up with you. And I hope none of them like trying to hit my doorstep, but any of y'all listening, y'all know y'all some players. Y'all know y'all some players. And I'm just being real. Y'all know it too. So, it's just wanted to give that scenario because it's interesting, because I know a lot of people, they will think, well, yeah, I want to be there, and I'm like, all that glitters ain't gold, because like I said, they getting a lot of drama too. Sometimes these cats even, they might even get some gay dudes trying to holler at them or something. And if they hetero, that shit's a no. That's a violation. But it's a deep thing, and it's it's something I don't really get to chase down as much, because like I said, a lot of guys don't have that experience. And the master teacher, Black Gnostic Speaks, he actually talked about he kind of talked about this. There ain't that many around. They ain't that many. And that's one thing. Whenever I can run into one, trust me, I pepper them to death with questions. I'd be like, and it's just amazing, like this subpopulation which you find. So anyway, I don't want to go too much further with it. Check out Sexual Chemistry, because the whole book ain't about Mr. Goodbar, because I do have chapters on how to develop sexual chemistry, and your sexual presence and everything. And also have one chapter I give you this sexual method. You'll blow her mind with it. She be giving you that look. Like, fellas, y'all ever get that look? You just hitting it so good, and she just stop and look at you. She see you at that moment. Yeah. So check it out for that. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm gonna talk to y'all later. Peace.